If you're combining R and Typest to automate PDF reports, then there's a good chance you're making this mistake. You crunch some numbers, you generate Typest code from that, and then you call Typest to render this. And technically this works, but it's also super messy. You will have lots of long strings in your R code, you will lose all Typest code highlighting, you will have to rerun R constantly, and the moment special characters show up, you have to escape everything and everything becomes a nightmare. So in today's video, I'm showing you the exact workflow I have taught students, clients and colleagues to separate R and Typest nicely. Not only does it make it easier to build such a report, it's also so much better to maintain this thing later on. So with that said, let me show you how that works. Right, let's take a step back and have a look at our R code to see what happened and why this happened. So we have some data here, it's just some fictitious sales data, and then we calculate a bunch of numbers. This part, super easy, standard R stuff, we're calculating stuff. And now here we're seeing that, okay, we're starting to generate Typest. I've called this part Typest here. And as you can see, I'm using the her function to loop stuff. So this is where our users often will think, okay, I will need a lot of loops, but this is also something we can move to Typest, so don't worry there. And then we also have some conditional logic here, which will later on determine whether something has a specific color. I'm calculating the color based on some logic here, and I'm using this in my Typest code that I'm preparing with the glue function here. Same thing with the node. I'm also doing formatting here. And then later on, I do the same thing again, basically after generating all of these sections. So as I called this stuff, you can see I have a bunch of Typest code. I collapse everything into one long code. So this is my full Typest document. And then I just write this to a file and use Typest to actually render this. And as I do, you can see that I have this PDF here. It doesn't look too fancy, obviously, but it is a nice way to show you concepts that we can move to Typest without having to bother R. So we have a lot of repetitive stuff here. For each region, we have the same type. So we're looping over stuff and we have different colors based on some conditions. So all of this is currently handled by R and we want to split this out. The idea is that we don't have to worry about special characters here. In our glue code, if I were, for example, forgetting to use these backslashes here, then as I call this, you'll immediately see, oh, there's an unclosed delimiter because we're using this $sign, which is in Typest a special character, and we have to escape it. This is a way to see that, okay, we don't really want to have the Typest code in R itself, because then we have to do more than if we had it just in a regular Typest file. And imagine if there is inside of your data special characters, you will have a whole bunch of safeties that you need to include. So that's a pain and we want to avoid that. Also, you have seen right now I was only able to show you this PDF the moment I executed my R code. But if I want to work only on the styling here, maybe change some layout, I will still have to call this R script to generate my Typest code. That's also a tedious way to work. I mean, again, it works, but it is much nicer to have that inside of Typest, and I'll show you how that works in a second. And of course, finally, your R code gets very long because there's so many strings in there. And also all of these strings have the same color because R cannot highlight these as according to Typest code. And this makes it so much harder to read. For example, if I were to type this or work on this, I'd have forgotten a parenthesis here, and then you wouldn't even see, okay, there is a parenthesis missing. With code highlighting, you'd see that pretty well. So that's our starting point. We have a bunch of strings for looping and conditional logic. Let's move all of this to Typest. So what we can do is create a new file, a Typest file that we call recording.type. And then let's start to copy over the stuff we currently have inside of our code here. And you can immediately see, okay, I get code highlighting, I get some weird stuff going on here. Here we'll have to escape this also in Typest, but we see it due to highlighting immediately. And then we also know that this will be some code that we need later on. So let's also throw this in here. After some indentations, we see that, okay, cool, this looks somewhat nice now. Here we see immediately there's a problem. Again, color highlighting does a nice thing. Let's for now define a color, say that this is blue. And then this thing will go away here. So now that we have extracted this stuff from our R code, let's move this away. We don't need to do this anymore. What we still need to do is to move our data that we've calculated, these numbers here somewhere where types can access this. And this is the first step we have to do to make this split work. What we do is we first create a list. Let's say we do handover, and this is where we collect everything we want in a list. So what we want to have are these things. These are our statistics that we want to display inside of Typest. And then we also need the underlying data. And we can also put this inside of a list. That's the power of lists. You can store arbitrary things in them and it will just be a collection of stuff. And now what we can do with this is to write this into a JSON file. We pass this to the JSON Lite package and use the write JSON function and say, let's save this into report data.json. And as we do that, we see that I have a new file. It's currently not formatted. So as I formatted this, you can see, okay, this is just a Typest file of my numbers. And in some cases, you might want to have not an array of numbers. If there is just one number, you want to have only one number. So what you can do is to say auto unbox and set it to true. And now if we look at our file again, you see that stuff that didn't need to be inside of an array is now just a plain number. So that's something we can use inside of Typest now. So what we can do inside of our Typest file is define a new variable. Let's call it data. And there we use the JSON function to load the data we have just saved. So this means that we now can access the data, and as I hover over the data, you see that as I have the TinyMist extension installed in Positron, it will show me all of the data I have, and I know that, okay, via summary total and summary average, I can now access the numbers that I want to display. So let's do this here. Actually, we have to get rid of these parentheses. That was our previous R glue code. In Typest, we just need the hashtag, say data.summaryTotal, and we do the same thing here for the summary average. We also get rid of this scales code because we don't need that here. And then let us comment out the rest for now so that this currently is a valid Typest file. What we can do inside of our console now is to call Typest, say to watch the following Typest file, namely the one we're currently working on. And it will now, as I save stuff, compile everything. And we can see that we have a recording PDF here now. And if we move this into a separate window, make this a little bit larger here, and then type in something, you see that you immediately see the changes inside of my PDF because Typest is now watching this Typest file and will render everything I changed. So this is a nice way of working with Typest. You have a data file where the data is stored in, and then you can just use it inside of your Typest file. As you save this, you will immediately see the results. And this is a better way of working than crunching the number, generating Typest code, and then calling Typest to render this, because you constantly have to do everything and you have to rerun R, even if you don't want to do any data related stuff, but only want to work on, say, layout related stuff. So that's a nice separation of concerns and makes for a nice workflow. Oh, by the way, if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to hit the like button to let me know that you enjoyed this video. And if you want to see more of that stuff, don't forget to subscribe. It tells me and the algorithm that you really enjoy my content. So thank you for that. And now let's get back to the content. So now let's have a look at our report here. That is our target image. We can see that we have for all sections or regions in our data, we have the same status, revenue, and node that tells us if this performance was good. And what we currently have in Typest, if we have our data variable, we see that we have the regions as these rows here. Basically, every row that was inside of our table became one object inside of Typest now, and we can iterate over this using Typest. And once we are able to do that, we're also able to apply some conditional logic with classical if-else statements. And then we can also get this color formatting or these labels depending on what we want to show. So as you can see, Typest is also very able to handle conditional logic and looping logic. I'll show you how this works here very quickly. But if you want to see this in more detail and I want to have some exercises, I do have a Typest course that will show you this kind of stuff, and the lesson about conditionals and looping is free. You can check it out via the link in the description. But if you don't want to check that out, you can also just follow along here for now and see if you get the gist out of that from this. So what we can do inside of Typest is to access the data and then access the DF sales. And as I were to save this, you will immediately see that inside of my Typest file, this is printed. Let me actually make this a little bit larger. You see that our data is in here now. It is a list of these dictionaries, basically. So what we can do is loop over each of these dictionaries. Let's call them regions. And for that, what we'll do is write for region in data df sales. Then we'll throw some curly brackets, and then we could put in the region in here. And then you'd see that currently only the last region is displayed. But if I were to access specific stuff from this region via the dot, say, let's get the region, then you see that all of this is concatenated. So we'll go through the north, south, east, west region, and all of the strings that are inside of this data dictionary, they are all just concatenated. So let's do a headline and then use a hashtag. And this currently isn't working because we're using curly brackets here, which is for code mode. We want to use content here. So we'll put in this into content mode via the brackets. And now you see that, okay, here are my headlines. So call this region. So now we have north region, south region, east region, and so on. And we can put in this status, which is bold text from our region object that has the status property. Again, we see that we have region, revenue, target, status, and so on. So here we get this content. We also know that there's like a dash, and it will tell us that this is the region percentage of target, and the text will say of target, and we'll get this stuff. And for the revenue and region status, I've done the same thing. Currently, the status is only displaying above instead of the actual node that we want to display. But this is something that we can handle via a nice if-else condition. Similarly, the percentages are not well formatted right now, but this is something we can fix by creating a couple of helper functions inside of Typest. So let's create a couple of helper functions. This is the main content below that. And then we can define a new helper variable. In this case, the helper variable is a function because it gets some arguments. We'll put this into curly brackets as this is supposed to contain code. And then we can do an if logic saying if status is above, then use this content. If the status is on track, use this content. And in all the other cases, use missed targets. And then once we have this helper function, we can actually use this inside of our regular content. And here it's just using status node. It's actually printing this as is. I forgot to put in a hashtag here, and then I don't need to use it there. And so with that, we have our notes. And actually, now that I see this, the revenue was also never printed. We also have to put this into a hashtag for now. And then we see that here our revenue is there again. And to format these numbers nicely, we can create a couple more helper functions. I don't want to go into too many details here. So let me just copy over the helper functions I have created for this. It's just a format percent and format currency function that will just concatenate strings to make this look nice. So that way we can use this format currency function wherever we want to have the currency displayed. So for region and revenue, like the total revenue, not for the region, but over here. So we have that. Then we don't need the extra $sign anymore. There's our total revenue, and all the other revenues are formatted as well. And we can do the same thing with the percentages. Sweet, so now we have the formatting, which is another great step. And the only thing that's missing is the coloring here. Now that we have seen the general structure, we can use this basic construct to also change the color of things. So let me throw in another helper function that determines the status color, and it will, for all of these cases above, on track, and everything else, will determine 3 colors. And then we can use this where we display the status. So let's wrap this into a text function. The content of that will be unchanged, but the fill color of this should be determined by the status color function. Let's do status color, and then we'll put in the region status we have. So now as I save this, we see that, hooray, we now have red and green color. Actually, we've never used this blue stuff or on track, but this doesn't matter. You get the idea of how to use if conditions that way. So with that, we have finished our types file. Now all that's left to do is to clean up our R file. We don't need this Typest code generation here anymore. So what we have is only the data crunching, the handover to the JSON file, and then we still render the report. Actually, we have to say use sorting.type. Don't need this stuff here, and we also need this here, so that we will write to the correct Typest file. And now as I execute this, we actually get errors, and this was a bad mistake. I've almost overwritten all of the stuff I've just shown you. Of course, we don't need to write anymore. We only need to render. Let's do render, and now, as we call this, we see that this file here re-renders and we don't get any errors anymore. Sweet, with that we have covered a nice way to separate R and types into their 2 different lanes so that they can work on their strengths. For R, that's data crunching, and for types, that's layout, formatting, and making things look nice. These are two separate concerns, so that's why we have split this up, and now we have a much better time because our R script is easier and shorter, and our types code is also self-contained, and we can work on this as we go, and we don't need to call R in between. Again, this used conditions and for loops. If you want to have more resources on that, check out the link in the description. It will lead you to the free lesson inside of my Typest course. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. And now with all of that said, I say thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.